there is enough Jews left in the left in Israel to actually take on the Likudniks and other ultra-right Zionists?
Well, I never said that religious Jews are the Zionists. Actually, it's the reverse. Just as in the India-Pakistan case, Jinnah was not a religious Muslim, but he was a Zionist. At least, if one is to believe Aisha Jalal, he found himself cornered by the Hindu Mahasabha, and therefore found he had no option but Zionism. But it's the same thing. On the question of Israel, Orthodox Jews opposed Zionism. That's known. And I never said anything otherwise. Is the civil war over? I doubt it. So long as there's life, human life, things change. Just to get a sense of it, we have to look at the kind of change which has brought the Zionist supremacy today. When Israel was established, it's a big question of numbers. Where do we get more people from? Where do we get more Jews? They were in Asia and in North Africa and in Ethiopia. This is the precursor to the great split in Israeli Jewry between the Ashkenazim, who are Jews who come from Europe, mainly Eastern Europe, but Europe, and the Mizrahim. These are the Jews who come from Asia, North Africa. The big difference is that the Mizrahim were Arab Jews. Their language was Arabic, their culture was Arabic, their religion was Judaism. And when they arrived in Israel, the Ashkenazim were horrified as to what specimen of humanity have we brought here to us. Even Hannah Arendt, when she wrote on Eichmann, had nothing but contempt. Straightforward European racist contempt for the Mizrahim. The Mizrahim, this Israeli state project, became one of de-Arabizing the Mizrahim and making real Jews of them, making of them religious Jews. Nothing else. Okay. Secularism was to be reserved for the Ashkenazi. The Mizrahim must become textbook Jews. The Mizrahim response has changed over time. The first Mizrahim response was a response of the intelligentsia. which was to create an organization which they called Black Panthers, right? Modeled after the Black Panthers in the US. Didn't get anywhere. Then came the second response, which was a more popular response, which was to create a religious mobilization under Zionist religious leadership. That's the social base of Zionism in Israel today. Not the Ashkenazis. The Ashkenazis provide the leadership, the Netanyahus and, but this is the social base, right? It's changed. It's changed. And there is no reason to believe further change cannot come about. I give you the example of South Africa. In South Africa, the most right wing of white power were the Boers, the Afrikaners. We got to 1994 and we got to a pact between African nationalists and the Afrikaners because the Afrikaners changed course. Why did the Afrikaners change course? And what was the difference between them and the English? The first difference was that the English always had two passports, an English passport and a South African passport, meaning they always had a fallback situation. The English were always there with a ticket in hand and they could run off, like the Ashkenazi in Israel. Chips come down and there's an emergency, the Ashkenazi have dual citizenship. They will fly. If the weather goes bad, the Ashkenazi, not all of them, but many have flown. Right? There are numbers on how many have left. As you say, there aren't enough now. But they've flown. The second reason the Boers changed is because they saw what was going on. They saw not themselves, not through their own eyes, but they saw through their children's eyes. It is the next generation, their kids, who were reaching the conclusion, why do we need an apartheid state? Who were forming delegations to go and meet the ANC in Switzerland or in Dakar, in different places. They did not change because they lost militarily. They did not lose militarily. Militarily there was a standoff. But politically they lost because they were losing their kids. And they realized that time was limited. Now, I'm not saying here that the situation is same in Israel. It is not the same. Which is why I say that the answer to these questions, there are no textbook answers, one state, two state, right? Because the answer also depends on human agency, right? The most correct answer has to be delivered by human agents. And the big change in Israel is we've had a genocide. We are going through a genocide. So that distinction, that polarization between the left wing and the right wing is kind of melted. Who is there on the left today who stands for a Palestinian state? And who is there on the Palestinian side who is going to stand for a one-state solution which is binational? In other words, compared to a year and a half ago, are we closer to coexistence or further away from it? Where were we before genocide? Where are we now? It's difficult to tell. Depends on what choices are offered, what happens. But I just say the subjective factor. We have to keep it in mind. I also say, let's not confuse the left wing and the right wing with the split between law of man and law of God. That's a split which continues inside Israel, and it's a deep split. Should the students in the yeshivas be exempt from military service, or should they not be exempt from military service? And how should the law treat different groups of Israelis? These are real life questions. If you're going to have a Jewish homeland, well, these are central questions.
Thank you. I have to flag something because I'm both intrigued and also disconcerted, if you will, by your formulation of the Qaeda-Azam as Zionist. Because, I mean,
I mean literally a Zionist.
Well,
but I mean...
No, the disconcerting part of it is that Zionism, to be very honest, is a specific term which cannot be applied to the subcontinental context. But anyway, we need to have a different session on that. So I'll not press the point, but I certainly wanted to flag it. With reference to, as a matter of fact, it's good that you've talked about this Haredim bill, because frankly, if we are thinking of some kind of civil war within Israel, it's likely to be more with reference to this rather than the left and the right. But the obviously external agents, it's quite clear, and I'm speaking here from a military perspective, that for Israel, this war was completely unsustainable without direct complicity of the United States of America. You need lots of material and wherewithal to sustain a war, and this war would not have gone beyond 2 months if the US was not involved in it directly, and also certain US allies. I just want to ask you, and I know, I mean, one can't really be predictive because one can't extrapolate into the future on the basis of present trend lines, but I'd nonetheless ask you to sort of give your perspective on, given where the situation is, where do you think we are headed with the change of administration in the United States, with the Israelis occupying parts of Lebanon, now into Syria, southwest Syria? I mean, they're just 22 kilometers from Damascus. They are on the Syrian side of Mount Hermon. Where do you think it's likely to go, especially if the Israelis are given a free pass by the incoming US administration in terms of exterminating and expelling the Palestinians, not just from Gaza, but also from the West Bank and East Jerusalem? And then we'll just open it to the floor for questions.
Well, I don't like to talk about the future.
No one does. The future is there.
No, I don't like to talk about the future. I have a very different understanding of political theory. In a Western university, you will be taught that political philosophy is as the Greeks told us, which is, what is the future you want to build? That's the point of political philosophy, to paint the future. I've never believed in it. I always thought that the point of political philosophy was twofold. One was to answer two questions. One, how did we get here? How did we get to this point? And two, how do we get out of here? Not some blueprint for the future, right? Plato's Republic or whatever. Not some blueprint, but real situations, historically embedded, not universal answers. Real situation, historically embedded, and real human agency, which must deliver it in this world. So, my interest in the question is marginal. But I'll speak to the issues that you refer to. One is the US-Israel relationship. Now, there's been a debate in the US on the Zionist connection. The Israel lobby, Mearsheimer and Waltz. And basically, the argument is the Israel lobby, there's an Israel lobby, a Zionist lobby, which has been driving US foreign policy against the interests of the US, against the general interest of the American state and the American people. And the other argument, the counter-argument, which has not been given much publicity, has been made by some Palestinians, most notably Joseph Massad, who's a professor at Columbia. And Massad has argued that really, let's not talk about the tail wagging the dog. It's the dog who is wagging the tail. This is American foreign policy. Okay, take it or leave it. Let's not blame the Israelis for it. That's not where the answer lies. The answer lies in engaging with the US. That war would not have survived even 2 months without the American involvement. It wouldn't have survived 2 days. Okay? All those 2,000-pound tons, every aircraft that brought it and delivered it, all of it is American. All of it. Right? Wouldn't have survived. So, I think the war, October 7 onwards, should make us rethink the question. Is this question of the dog and the tail? Who is wagging home? The Israel lobby? Is it responsible for US foreign policy? This question would need reformulation. It would need us to rethink the relationship between Israel and the US. Is Israel a foreign entity? Or is it part of the US, offshore, an offshore part of the US? Now Israel, of course, is more complicated than just an American base, because Israel is also, it's a homeland. For the religious Jews, it's a homeland, right? And that cannot be minimized. Right? They don't see it as an American base. But it's a homeland which has been converted into an American base. And the implications of that are serious. The implications of that are serious for this civil war that I was referring to earlier. I'm not saying that there is a clear answer. The situation is dynamic. It's dynamic. So what the Trump administration is going to do, I don't think depends on what the Trump administration wants to do. It depends on a rapidly changing situation. The region is changing. Suddenly the Americans are buddies with the most right-wing Islamists that they claim to have been fighting all the time in Syria. I'm talking of Syria, right? Suddenly the Americans are buddies. But there's no clarity on who has emerged the winner in Syria. Is it the Americans or is it the Turks? Who are the real winners in Syria? Right? Have Americans simply jumped on? Maybe provided tanks and this and that. It's not the first time the Americans would have won the war and lost the peace. They won in Iraq and they did over to Iran. Right? It's not the first time that the outcome of military contest is not the same as the outcome of a political contest. Right? Just about every guerrilla war, liberation war, was one where the guerrillas lost militarily and won politically. The French in Algeria, the Mau Mau in Kenya. You can go on and on. Right? So these are not these are not given. I mean, and especially now. Now with Trump coming in, everybody says Trump is transactional. Trump is kind of stupid. Trump is transactional. I don't buy either. I mean, of course he's transactional. Of course he believes that the U.S. He said it many, many years ago that the U.S. is spending out of pocket for rich friends, the Europeans. He is, and he wants to change the American setup in the world. He thinks America is too involved, over-involved. He's a peace candidate. He is. He says, I'm the only one who didn't start a new war. The only American president since the Second World War who didn't start a new war. It's true. No proof that he will not start something. But I'm saying it's too dynamic. I'm not willing to predict the future.
Well, I wasn't exactly asking you to predict the future. I was thinking more in terms of a structural analysis of, what and you're right. Trump is transactional, but he's certainly not impulsive. We had a session yesterday. As a matter of fact, if you go back 30 years, you'll realize that there are at least three motifs that run through Trump's belief system. But I'm happy you mentioned Joseph. He's a dear friend, and I've had the pleasure of interacting with him over some years. And he's right about who's wagging what. But he's also, as you know, deeply invested in what's going on. And he does believe that the agency on the ground is also going to, in terms of second and third order effects, is likely to change perception. And that's exactly what we've seen in the United States. You mentioned Mearsheimer and Walt's work. What they wrote, and the book became very controversial, is something that is now far more mainstream in the United States and US academia, including in your own university. So and that has largely been the function of what happened on October 7th and later. But it seems to me that we are headed for a policy which, unfortunately, is going to bring more pain on the Palestinians. I'm happy you spoke about Syria. As I mentioned, Turkey has actually, for its parochial limited interests, and the United States for its broader interests, specifically with reference to Iran as in an adversarial framework and Israel in a cooperative framework, needed to cut off that land bridge between Iran and Lebanon, which is what they've done. But I'm going to open the floor for discussion, but first I'd request my friend and someone who's from the region with a nose to the ground, has been reporting from there, Leila Hatoum, if you could kick off the discussion on this and then we'll go to the others.
I'm sorry. Hi, everyone. I didn't expect to be speaking today. I was just taking some notes, but I was listening to the doctor, and thank you so much for explaining things in such a simple way for people to understand it. I agree almost to everything that you have said. There are some notes that I would have wanted to clarify if you allow me. When it comes to the Jews of the world, they're divided into 4 types. You have the Ashkenazi, those are the white European Jews, as the doctor said. The Mizrahim or Mizrahis are the Eastern Jews or the Arab Jews. Then you have the Sephardic Jews, and those are the Jews who came from Minor Asia and lived in Europe for a long time. Then they got kicked out during the Spanish Inquisition, and they found or sought refuge in the Arab world and the Muslim world, mainly in North Africa. And then you have the Samaritans. Those are the original Jews of Palestine. Now they're under 800 of them living in Mount Gerizim in Jerusalem, in Palestine, in occupied Palestine. And those people are the closest to say to the original Hebrews than anybody else. And they don't marry from outside the cult, otherwise they lose their identity. That's why they are small in number. And the Israelis also put them under so much pressure. They had refused to acknowledge having Palestine as their state, Israel as their state, because they believe that they shouldn't have a state until the Messiah comes and he ushers them to his kingdom. And so does most of the Arab Jews. During the 60s, 70s, and even the 80s, the Israelis bombarded and pressured and threatened Arab Jews to go into the Israeli entity. And this is what happened with the Iraqis. This is what happened to some of the Lebanese Jews. Our main synagogue in Beirut, Magan Abraham, was bombarded by the Israelis, and the Israelis claimed that there was a PLO cannon next to it, so like they were targeting the PLO. But those Jews who lived in the Arab world, most of them also don't believe that they should have a state of their own. So they fled to Europe, to Latin America, North America, rather than coming in bulk to the Israeli entity. What did the Israelis do later on with the Aliyah? They started having agreements with North African Arab nations, paying them to allow for the Jews to leave forcefully to the Israeli entity. And this is what they also did to the Yemenis. They brought in the Yemeni Jews from Yemen. The moment they landed, what did they do to them? Because the Ashkenazis have racism, but they also want to claim that they have traits or basically heritage in that land. They stole the children of the Yemeni Jews. And this was one of the massive scandals in Israel. They stole their children upon landing in Palestine, and they distributed them over European Ashkenazi families, and they told the Yemeni Jews that their children had died. Decades later, and we're talking about 90s and 2000s, those Yemeni Jews, by mistake, by sheer luck, found out that some of those Jewish kids grew up in Ashkenazi families, and it became a massive scandal. This is another part why the Israeli entity, until today, bans DNA testing in Israel, because it will prove that some of those children were not killed, they were given to what you call white Europeans, so you can mix the race and you can claim that you have traits and DNA heritage.
It's a big question. I'm not surprised at all that Saudi Arabia and Egypt and Jordan but now the next thing is, where is Israel going? what kind of green light does it have from the US? I don't believe the US, I think somebody said it in yesterday's session, that the US foreign policy doesn't change, only its mode of delivery changes when it comes to Israel. So where is Israel going? Is there now a blueprint of a greater Israel which is going to incorporate in it some parts of South Lebanon, some parts of Syria, some parts of Jordan? We don't know. But it'll change things more than have changed so far.
Hello, Dr. Mudassir Ejaz here, sir. Well, thank you so much, first of all, for being here, Professor. So my question is simple, it is difficult to understand the concept of Israel. How can we conceptualize the state of Israel? Whether is it a colonial outpost or an ideological state or something else? Because state behavior of state of Israel is very much different from rest of the states. So what it is actually? Is it a ideological state?
Okay, got your question.
Colonial outpost.
Got your question.
I think the first thing to grasp is that Israel is no different from other states at a certain level. Israel believes that it has the right of self-determination, like all states do. Israel believes that it has the right to be a nation state. The nation is Jewish. The nation doesn't have to be racial. The nation does not have to be ethnic. The nation doesn't have to be linguistic. It can also be religious. Self-determination means the nation defines. The self defines itself. But the different thing about Israel is Israel from the very beginning was a project which the Zionists knew was not possible without the involvement of big powers, right from the outset. So there was no question of an independent Israeli state in the mode of other states. It was not a question of neo-colonialism. It was a question of direct involvement, whether of the British, then of the US. And the more Israel has gotten involved, I mean, look, US has been, since the 67 war, the US has been in some way central to Israel's welfare. And it has been unable to provide security to Israel, right? In fact, I would even ask whether the US is interested in security for Israel. Because a secure Israel makes Israel not the instrument that it needs and wants, right? The US needs an Israel permanently in danger. Right? Okay, I'll stop there.
One last question, because we've run out of time.
Hello. Sorry. I didn't mean to do that. In terms of Israel...
How was the battery?
Yeah, it's still working. I guess Leila can also answer this question, but in terms of resources, do you think it's possible that the United States' objective now is to finish the construction of the Ben Gurion Canal, which is supposed to compete with the Suez Canal in terms of trade resources, or is that just a theory that's just been floating around to counter their actual agenda?
Well, I wouldn't discount it. And at the same time, I would not say it is the explanation. The US always has its eye on resources. Greed often exists with plenty. But I would just say, I'd raise a cautionary note about just going by structural analysis. This is maybe a point of disagreement between us because structural analysis is inherently conservative. It is not open to revolutionary, radical possibilities. I don't know of any revolution in the history of the world which was predicted by anybody. It always came as a huge surprise. Even the fall of the Soviet Union came as a huge surprise. The US had umpteen think tanks on the Soviet Union. None of them told us that this project will be gone in a year, 2 years. Because it's crises, how crisis is resolved does not depend on structure. Because the meaning of crisis is that agency becomes critical and crucial. Right? So we are at such a moment. That's what I believe in the Middle East. We are at such a moment. I mean, whole house of cards could collapse. And yet, they may build a stronger house. Who knows?
Well, thank you so much. It's actually not a minor disagreement.
Can I give them a practical thing on the Ben Gurion Canal? Because he says it might likely happen. So I go for practicality on the ground. I want everybody to hold their palm in front of their eyes. And your thumb, your left palm, okay? Your thumb is the Suez Canal, where Egypt is on the other side, and it leads from the Red Sea all the way to the Mediterranean. And your pinky is basically the end of the Aqaba Gulf, which basically separates Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Jordan, and the Israeli entity from Rashash, which is Eilat. Now, the Israelis want to create a canal from Eilat over here, all the way up towards near Gaza to the Mediterranean Sea over there, right? This is so far the picture. For you to create that canal, which goes against the challenges because you have mountains and desert, everything, it's going to cost you at least $60 billion, if not $100 billion. And the Israelis were speaking about using, smaller nuclear bombs underground to detonate and create it, which is not feasible, by the way, from a geographical and logical perspective. The Suez Canal so far gets Egypt up to $2 billion a year. So is it worth to spend $100 billion for $2 billion a year? That is if they get all the trade through their canal and not through the Suez as well. The Greater Israel project is to take over parts of Egypt that includes the Suez Canal. So for them, is it easier to pay $100 billion to try to finance it and work for at least 6 to 10 years to create it, or basically to take over that piece of land, which is Sinai with the Suez Canal? So logically, it's not feasible. And even on the ground, the resistance from the Egyptians and everybody else is not going to work, because you do have Egyptians who are against the Israeli project, and the Palestinians will not allow it. It took them 15 months and they couldn't eradicate Hamas in North Gaza alone. They continue to fire missiles against the Gaza enclave settlements until today from Jabalia and other areas in northern Gaza Strip. Do you think that they will be able to create that canal in the next 10 decades without any resistance? Sorry, 10 years without any resistance? It's impossible.
Thank you so much, Laila. It's lovely because it was a great question. I wanted to engage with you post-session on this, but I'm happy Laila has talked about it because she and I are both avid readers of maps. Geography has its own tyranny, and she's absolutely right that instead of creating that canal, which is quite infeasible for various reasons, it is much better to have this whatever fantastic Greater Israel project, which actually brings the Suez under the control of the Israelis, which actually happened in, you have the Suez crisis, where even the British, the French, and the Israelis. And while the British and the French, after the UNSC resolution, pulled out, Ben Gurion did not. And finally, the US President, Ike, had to tell Ben Gurion that you need to get out, and Ben Gurion said to him, Knesset will not accept. He said, Knesset is your problem, not mine. Get the hell out. And that's when the Israelis pulled out. So anyway, but thank you so much. It was a lovely session. I'm so happy that Professor Mamdani was here. There are a number of issues post-session. I'll talk to him about structural analysis and the element of agency, but that can be done later. Give him a big hand and we'll close it.